Okay, this is chapter 3 of Be Water, My Friend by Shannon Lee. The Eternal Student. Life itself is your teacher, and you are in a constant state of learning. The Classical Mess. By 1964, my father had established his second martial arts school in Oakland, California. He was married to my mom, and they were expecting their first child, my brother Brandon. My father's schools in Seattle and now Oakland, called the Zhongfan Gong Fu Institutes, were teaching a slightly modified form of Wing Chun, the martial art he had learned in Hong Kong as a teenager. I say slightly modified because my father had started to contemplate and experiment with shifts in technique. These were very small deviations from the traditional form, such as slight angling of the foot here and more movement at the waist there. Quicker initiation of movement in response to an opponent, etc. But for the most part, he was still teaching Wing Chun. But because he was Bruce Lee, and because he was 24, he was a bit of a loudmouth. He was also bucking tradition in ways that annoyed the Chinese Kung Fu old guard in San Francisco's Chinatown community. My father would give demonstrations at Sun Sing Theater in Chinatown, and he would talk loudly and brashly about how many of the Chinese martial arts were bogging down by unnecessary wasted motions, using the term classical mess repeatedly to disparage other traditional kung fu styles. He would then challenge people to come up on stage and see if they could best his technique. As if that weren't enough to ruffle feathers, he also opened his schools to people of all races and backgrounds. In the eyes of the Kung Fu establishment, traditions were meant to be adhered to, and while the occasional non-Chinese might find their way into Chinese Kung Fu classes from time to time, there was certainly not an open-door policy to the general public. Bruce was disrespectful and ruining the old ways, and for traditionalists in Chinatown, this would not stand. In late 1964, the San Francisco Chinatown community issued a challenge against my father. They had had enough of his bold, young man and his rebellious ways, and they were going to do what they could to silence him. They proposed a challenge match to be fought at my father's school in Oakland. If their champion won, Bruce Lee would cease teaching, and if my father won, he would continue on unimpeded. Of course, my father accepted the challenge. He was definitely not going to allow anyone to dictate his life in this way, and he was highly confident that he would be successful. He had faith in his ability, and there was no way he was going to stand up for himself on his beliefs, no matter the outcome. It may sound like something out of a movie, but this was real life for my family. My mother, who was several months pregnant at the time, was there for the fight, along with my father's good friend and assistant instructor, James Lee, since deceased. The group from Chinatown, which were several in number, assembled at my father's school in November of 1964 for the match. They presented their champion, a random fighter who they selected because of his prowess and who was not engaged in the matter directly. And then they began to lay down the rules. No eye gouging, no shots to the groin, no this, no that. This was where my father stopped them. There would be no rules. My father proclaimed that if they were indeed seeking to threaten his livelihood and attempt to shut down the very essential part of his being, then the match would have to be a real fight and nothing held back. The fight would end with a knockout or submission. That was it. The Chinatown guys conferred briefly and agreed. Everyone moved to the side of the room, and without further ado, my father came out swinging. The fight itself was very unorthodox. After the exchange of the initial blows, the opponent took off running with my father trying to grab hold of him and attack from the back. Traditional technique had taken a back seat to survival, and the blows were sloppy and a bit wild. The fight lasted all but 3 minutes. My father's opponent ended up on his back, my father standing over him, fists poised, yelling in Cantonese, "Do you give up? Do you give up?" And finally, the man submitted and replied, "I give up." After everyone had left, my father sat outside his school on the curb with his head in his hands like a defeated man. Even though he had clearly won, my mother approached him and asked why he seemed so upset. He should be celebrating, shouldn't he? Yes, he had won, but he'd come away with something more powerful than the self-satisfaction of victory. Up to this point, my father was giving demonstrations of his technique and might say something like, "Try to hit me," or "Try to block my punch," but those promptings were within the comfortable realm of his experience. That is to say, there was a certain level of expectation in what might happen in those scenarios. They were contained. But this fight had been different. It had tested him in a new way. First of all, he had to chase this man around the room, not something you usually have to do in a fight, and he'd become winded. Secondly, he had to attack someone from the rear who was running away, also not something anyone practices in martial arts. And finally, they had done away with the traditional stances, rules, and exchange of measured blows. And though my father had been the one to make this request, he still had not been totally prepared for what occurred. The fight had shown him things about himself that he had not previously known, particularly that he was not in great physical condition. Don't get me wrong, he was in fine shape, but he had attained that shape through the practice of martial arts techniques only. He hadn't been cross-training or working on pure physical fitness. After the fight, he also saw clearly that his traditional Wing Chun tradition hadn't prepared him for anything goes scenario. He had still won, he had kept his cool, and he delivered blows, but they'd been improvised and made him feel haphazard and out of control. He had seen how much more he had to consider and how much more he had to learn. As it turns out, this fight would be a pivotal moment in my father's life. He had not been empty enough to make room for a true assessment of the entire situation. He might have missed out on seeing all that he had to learn. He could have high-fived his friend James, hugged my mom, gone out for a nice meal, and told his friends all about how he had sent those old Chinatown guys packing. But then you probably wouldn't know his name today, and I certainly wouldn't be writing this book. Instead of reveling in his victory, my father used the lessons of the fight to begin a long personal journey. He became interested in what it meant to be well-rounded, physically fit, and fully creative fighter. What it meant to release oneself of limitations, and most important for your purpose, what it meant to be a fluid human being. Shortly after the fight, my father started to consider the physical realities of combat and what might be possible when one wasn't bound by traditions or norms of any particular style. This was the great revelation of his martial career, and the beginning of the art of Jeet Kune Do. As a symbol and testament to his seriousness about this new journey, he reached out to a metalworker, friend and student, George Lee, and asked him to create something for him. He sent George a sketch of a miniature tombstone and asked that the headstone read, "In memory of a once fluid man, crammed and disordered by the classical mess. This tombstone was my father's reminder that his limited, rigid, traditional approach must die in order for him to rise again in his original fluid self. It was a reminder to move forward like flowing water. No master allowed. Each man must seek out realization himself. No master can give it to him. My father never wanted to be called a master. He said, "Once you say you've reached the top, then there's nowhere to go but down." Instead, he considered himself to be an eternal student, always open to new ideas, new possibilities, new directions, and new growth. He saw his process as a peeling of layers, of a never-ending onion, always uncovering new layers of his soul and revealing new levels of understanding. My life, it seems, is a life of self-examination, a self-peeling of myself bit by bit, day by day. More and more, it's becoming simple to me as a human being. More and more, I search myself, and more the questions become listed. And more I see clearly. I am happy because I am growing daily and honestly don't know where my ultimate limit lies. To be certain, every day there can be a revelation or a new discovery that I can obtain. These are the words of a man passionate about learning. This focused enthusiasm for understanding and growth lit him up and unleashed him. It gave him permission to explore and create, and was a hallmark of his genius. He made connections between disciplines and ideas where others weren't even looking because he had an open mind and was a consummate experimenter. For instance, when it came to developing his art of Jeet Kune Do, he delved not just into standard martial arts for inspiration and information. He looked at Western boxing, fencing, biomechanics, and philosophy. He admired the simplicity of boxing, incorporating its ideas into his footwork and his upper body tools, jab, cross, hook, bob, weave, etc. And from fencing, he began by looking at the footwork, range, and timing of the top hit and the riposte, both techniques that meet attacks and defenses with preemptive moves. From biomechanics, he studied movement as a whole, seeking to understand the physical laws and motion while understanding biological efficiencies and strengths. And within philosophy, he read widely from both Eastern and Western writers, such as Lao Tzu, Alan Watts, and Krishnamurti, while also picking up a popular self-help books of the day. He was open to all inspiration and all possibilities, his only limit being the limit of his own imagination and understanding. I've come to develop a great fondness for experimentation in my own life. I run small tests and scenarios all the time to see what personal insights the results may bear. I've done everything from trying to say yes to all invitations for a certain amount of time to sitting with a particular chant for a specific number of days to drinking warm lemon water every morning. I've participated in rituals and workshops that appealed to me or followed my intuition fanatically for a period or decided concisely to engage in a particular relationship to see where it goes. And nowadays, during all these experiments, I try to hold the posture and stance of emptiness, non-judgment, and openness, so that I can try to really see, feel, and understand the optimal way of being for me. Oftentimes, it happens that I don't see an experiment through, and then there's information in that as well. Did I not stick to it because it wasn't working for me? Or did I stop because it was too hard or because I had some sort of blind spot or blockage that I ran up against? The possibilities for learning and growth are endless if you are prepared to dig in. Most important, this position of experimentation makes everything a little less heavy and a little more fun. The new framework of curiosity and possibility can take the stress or fear out of feeling that your decisions are monumentally fixed or finite. Set life up like an experiment. Investigate and be open to findings. And the heaviness of living may just ease a bit. Put on your researcher's hat. We did a program at the Bruce Lee family company that my friend and colleague Shannon Lee developed called Creative Fridays. One of the first assignments we were given was to go and participate in something that we were interested or curious about and had never tried or experienced before. This meant we got to put on our researcher hats and go into the field as explorers. I'm generally a little introverted by nature and sometimes find it challenging to enter social situations and converse comfortably, always relying on the hope that someone else will be a stellar conversationalist and I can just hitch a ride. But when I was able to operate in a framework of a researcher, I suddenly had a whole new perspective. I no longer had to be the nervous, conversationally challenged person with nothing to say. Instead, I was on a mission of discovery. I would take the spotlight off me and put it squarely on the people I was researching. With this newfound freedom, I said yes to all sorts of classes and social situations I had always been interested in, but had never tried. Breath work, parties where I didn't know anyone, Reiki, I was able to observe and converse with the others around me. And as a result, I got to practice being a more open version of myself. This stance of curiosity can be both freeing and engaging. Instead of being a passive participant, a bystander who waits to be called on, or someone who puts in all the pressure on themselves to be dazzling, you can give yourself the role of the adventure seeker, the detective, the journalist, or the anthropologist. When you become actively engaged, even just observationally, and look through the lens of curiosity, a whole new world will open up to you, and nothing will be as dull or as scary as you imagined. This is the advice I'm always trying to give my teenage daughter who tells me she's bored or that her teacher is lame. I tell her to challenge herself and see what she can discover and find interesting. Make it a game. See what there is to learn and observe about any situation. For instance, pause right now and take in your surroundings. Are you in a coffee shop? Are you at home in bed? How do you feel? Is this book engaging to you? Do you feel energized or interested? Or is it a struggle to get through it? And are you falling asleep? Are you in one of your happy places, or are you distracted by noise and getting frustrated? What can you learn about yourself? Can you see what is frustrating you right now? This book, the noise, something that happened earlier today? What would you do differently? Or is this perfection? What can you learn about yourself right now that maybe you didn't already know? There is always something to note, and sometimes the most valuable thing you discover is that what you're doing or where you are is not where you want to be, and that gives you the opportunity to begin charting a path out of there. The kind of information can be pure gold. It can save you from continuing to pursue a path that is leading you away from your soul. Research your own experience. One of the core mandates of Jeet Kune Do and my father's life was this process. Research your own experience. Reject what is useless and accept what is useful. And add what is essentially your own. As we saw in the opening story, it was extremely important that my father took full stock of his experience on that Oakland fight. He had felt troubled by certain aspects of his victory, but just casually pushed them aside until later, or until never, as is often the case. He would have missed a huge opportunity to grow and evolve, but because he took heed and gave serious attention to the entirety of his experience, in particular, the troubling bits, he created a new art form and philosophy and went on to change the landscape of martial arts globally, while Bruce Lee's life provides us with an impressive example. Remember that we are focusing on you here and the course and direction of your life. His life story is complete in this form of Bruce Lee. Yours is ongoing, and Bruce can be an amazing pointer of the way. In fact, he himself said, "Remember, I am no teacher. I can merely be a signpost for a traveler who is lost. It is up to you to decide on the direction. All I can offer is an experience, but never a conclusion. So even what I have said needs to be thoroughly examined by you. I might be able to help you to discover and examine your problem by awakening your awareness. A teacher, a good teacher, that is, functions as a pointer to truth, but not a giver of truth." Another way to say this is, don't give up on your sovereignty or personal power. Claim your own path and your own experience. Be respectful and grateful for the signposts you encounter, the lessons you learn, and the teachers who point the way. But remember that you and you alone are responsible for your path and your growth. As we discussed, there are always something to note about your experience. The best place to start is with how something makes you feel. Energized or flat? Engaged or bored? This allows us to assess everything we experience with discernment and figure out what speaks to who we are. In this way, we are attempting to attain or to remember our nature, to recall that water stagnates and evaporates when it is not given what it needs to be itself, movement and connection to its source. In order for us to research our own experience, we need to be learning from what's around us. We need to be in full flowing connection to assess, to pursue the energy that makes us feel most alive and good and essentially ourselves. Understand your ignorance. The tricky part of researching your own experience is that we often don't understand our own ignorance. What is our own ignorance? It is the lack of understanding of our true selves, our soul, as it were. We do not understand what part we play in the creation of our lives, so we point the finger outward rather than in. And that problem comes from ego. We frequently think we know what we want or what path we should be going down because our ego tells us what it thinks is best for us. Gary Zukov, in his book, The Seat of the Soul, points this as a struggle between the wants and needs of the personality versus of the soul. So how do we tell the difference between what is in our ego and what is of our soul or essence? One key indicator that the ego is in the driver's seat rather than your soul is the word should. If your decisions come from a place of should much of the time, then you're not necessarily being guided by your true essential self. You may be giving up your authority to whomever the arbiters of should are. Your parents, your partner, your teacher, your religion, society, etc. Another time to watch out for the ego is whenever you find yourself overly interested in how you are perceived. The ego comes through the image you have of yourself and the attachment you have to being identified a specific way by others, i.e., your reputation. If you are worried about what others think of you, if you need people to think you are a nice person, if you never want to be the bad guy, if you need to have a fancy house, a car, then your ego is hard at work. Now, there's nothing wrong with having nice things or being a nice person, but does this drive how you act to the detriment of your peace of mind? Do you obsess over what others think and feel about you? Do you do things that you don't really want to do because you need to be perceived in a certain way? Is your self-worth dependent on external circumstances? Once we've determined if we are operating from our ego self rather than our true self, we do how do we take it a step further to understand the cause of our own ignorance? Especially if we are in fact ignorant of the source of the problem in the first place. Discovering our ignorance is actually a deep concept in Buddhist texts, looking at how we suffer because we place our happiness, or lack thereof, on attachments to things outside ourselves. My father often spoke about this. Discovering our ignorance requires a lot of self-awareness and honesty, but it's possible to do so even if we are not yet totally self-aware. We just need to decide to really look. So, where to begin? One place you can start is with the should-ing. Listen to yourself and observe how you feel when someone presents you with a choice and you feel a should coming on. Your mom wants you to go for Thanksgiving. You have the thought of you should go. How does that should make you feel? Alive or muted? If it makes you feel energized, then your should is actually an expression of your true self, and therefore not a should, but a recognition of something that is essential to you. Family time, travel, etc. It is an expression of your heart. But if it makes you feel heavy or shut down, even just a little bit, that is something to take a look at. Why aren't you excited? Why does it feel heavy? Investigate. It may not change the decision, but it can illuminate the cause and help give you more clarity and more freedom. It can help you get to the bottom of what's of value to you and where you might need to do some work. There are also clues in the word ignorant itself, which is rooted in the word ignore. What are you ignoring in your life? What thoughts keep nagging at you that you push away? What feeling come back again and again that you shove down and deny What patterns keep playing out over and over in your life? I know a guy who is always telling me that people are bad mouthing him and saying he's duplicitous. He tells me that it's not true, all the gossip and rumors, and he doesn't know why everyone says these things about him all the time without a stance on what is true or not true. My suggestion to him is to ask himself the following: what is he doing or not doing that is making people feel ill at ease about his integrity? Then he can investigate with the intent to really look at himself and see what others might be seeing, and ultimately decide for himself if there are changes he needs to make. Of course, some of the things that are actually good for you come with shoulds too, like I should eat better or I should exercise more. These shoulds may be actually what you need, but because you are shoulding them and are pushing them away and ignoring them, they can feel heavy and therefore need to be examined. And perhaps it is not the eating or exercising that is actually the issue, but your core wounds that are keeping you from showing up for yourself, wounds that you continue to ignore. Personally, I soothe with food. I always have. Shifting that pattern has been a continuous struggle throughout my life. I probably vaguely recognize I was doing it in my 30s, and I berated myself for doing it for another decade, but still had no way to change it. Food become a conduit for reward and punishment, for defiance and control, and for comfort and happiness too. And you can't just stop eating altogether. Food is necessary fuel. Simply knowing it was happening wasn't leading me to a solution, in part because I wasn't actively trying to solve the problem in the curious and open way. I was acknowledging the existence of the problem, but was too overwhelmed to do anything about it, other than what was socially acceptable: complaining, being self depreciating, following crazy diets and exercise fads, sometimes being a little overweight, and sometimes feeling bad about myself. Sometimes not, but I certainly wasn't looking for the cause of the issue. I'm not obese. I don't think so much of a problem, is it really? Well, if something is occupying a lot of your mental and physical energy, then it is a problem, whether it's manifesting physically or not. And it's going to keep you locked into a life of ongoing inner struggle and personal negativity if you don't deal with it. After all, if you're honest with yourself, you already know what those things are that plague you internally, even if you don't know what to do about them. Then, one day in my early 40s, I was recounting a memory to someone about my father's death. I was telling them about his visceral memories I had surrounding the Hong Kong funeral. There was a feeling of chaos. There were thousands of people lining the streets, large crews from every news outlet, fans sidewalks. It was an open casket affair, and my mother, brother, and I were dressed in traditional white Chinese. We had to make our way in front of my father's body in full view of the TV cameras and photographers and do our bowing ritual before sitting on the ground in front of his coffin. I remember the chaos like a tornado swirling all around me, while I myself was shut down in the eye of the storm. I was numb and probably in a state of shock. After all, I was only 4 years old. After the service, some kind human took me by the hand and said, "Come on, let's go get some candy." And I remember thinking, yes, Give me something that will make me feel some form of happiness right now that I can relate to. And just like that, 40-something-year-old me had a revelation mid-story about one of the origins of my food issues. It is definitely not every piece of the puzzle, but it was enough of a connection for me to understand one cause of this lifelong issue. It had been there all along, but I hadn't connected to it because I wasn't really looking. I'd been hiding from the feeling of death of my father, in hiding from the feeling I'd obfuscated a true look of this destructive pattern. My sense of safety had become wrapped up in a piece of candy, or a whole bag, knowing me. I'd been operating under a hypothesis that my eating ineptitudes could only be controlled through strong denial of myself. Pro tip: nothing is ever truly healed or resolved in this way. I am on a path of understanding more and more about myself every day and shifting my perspective just like my father did. I'm becoming more conscious about what I'm ignoring or denying, and my learning process has become faster, my struggles fewer and less intense. This revelation about my self-soothing habits, while not a full solution, had given me something to explore, which led to an understanding of what else might need looking at. As my father himself said, learning is discovery, the discovery of the cause of our ignorance. It is discovering what is there in us. When we discover, we are uncovering our own abilities, our own eyes, in order to find our potential, to see what is going on, to discover how to enlarge our lives, and find means at a disposal to help us cope and grow. Don't be in a hurry to fix things, rather, enrich your understanding in the ever-going process of discovery, and I find more of the cause in your ignorance. The beginning of really seeing. My food breakthrough happened very haphazardly, but it doesn't have to be haphazard for you. Let this be a cautionary tale of how many years of struggle can be avoided if you just proactively decide instead to get conscious and start paying attention. Because, let's be honest, if I wanted to know that information sooner, I could have just chosen to look more closely and see what was there. So I encourage you to open yourself and look deeply, even when it is painful or scary. I'm not going to lie to you. It takes courage to look at your issues. It requires work to release them. And you may be frustrated at times. You may feel as if you don't know what you're doing or what the next best step is. It may shake you off what you thought was your foundation, and it may make you feel a little insecure. You may decide it's just easier not to look or know and just put up with the soul discomfort for the rest of your life. But as you gain skill and practice, you will learn to develop ways to grow past that which scares you, and it will get easier. And your process will actually become so intriguing to you that it will start to engage your enthusiasm. In the Oakland fight, my father was able to feel his struggle points, his frustration, and his fear. And rather than running from or burying those, he said to himself, let's take a closer look. He believed that to understand your fear is the beginning of really seeing. You have to be willing to look at the problematic pieces. If you won't look and look deeply, then you will never discover an important layer of yourself. a layer that might be holding you back or sabotaging you over and over again, and blocking your healing and growth. Understanding your fear is a very important step to maximizing your potential. Fear, my father explained, compels us to cling to traditions and gurus. There can be no initiative if one has fear. He goes on to say that the enemy of development is pain phobia, the unwillingness to do a tiny bit of suffering. As you feel unpleasant, you interrupt the continuum of awareness and you become phobic. The key, then, is to integrate these uncomfortable moments into your attention and awareness rather than turn away from them. And when you confront your fears, a miraculous thing happens. They lose their power over you. They become just another puzzle piece in the process of knowing yourself. Another point of interest, another layer of discovery along the way. Remember, don't beat yourself up over your fears or your shortcomings. We all have them, and they are just a roadmap for where you need to dig in to discover. And as you are about to see, there is a flip side to what we consider our weaknesses. Strengths and weaknesses. Weaknesses and strengths are inextricably connected. You may think of them as separate. You have your weaknesses, then you have your strengths. Well, I've come to think of this duality of faults and assets as an IRL expression of yin-yang. In looking more closely at myself, I've realized that I can't claim pride in my abilities without acknowledging their deficits as well as vice versa. For example, I'm very good at being alone. I like to be still and silent. I am strong and self-sufficient. And I'm not easily bored. And at the same time, I sometimes isolate myself and then find it hard to connect with people. I don't ask for help when I could really use it. I'm good at muscling through life, but I can become drained and exhausted by this. I've also discovered from many different experiences that I like variety. I like variety in what I eat, in my work day, and in the things I do. I feel a kinship in spontaneity, surprises, and new experiences, even troubling ones. So naturally and conversely, I struggle with routine. It took me until I was in my 30s to incorporate washing my face every night into my daily routine. I've had a hard time paying bills on time and going through my mail regularly. I struggle with going to the grocery store and washing the dishes. My strength of enjoying going with the flow and having new experiences makes handling the necessary of the routine and the mundane hard for me. Discovering this about myself and realizing that my perceived faults were intimately tied to my strengths has helped me to keep perspective and maintain a sense of balance as I move through life. It also helps with not beating myself up because every perceived weakness has a strength attached, and every strength a weakness. So if I'm going to berate myself for my weaknesses, then I should be celebrating my strengths as well, or we could just not make either thing good or bad, and instead be with what is and keep moving forward, like water, towards the balance or flow we seek. Self-knowledge is a game of balance, of understanding what we actually need in any given moment to flow through life. We need both rest and action. We need alone time and social time. We need self-reliance and we need help. And we only come to understand in what way we need these things through investigating our true nature. Ask yourself, what can you discover about you? Start small. What can you learn about yourself from your favorite TV shows? What can you learn about how you want to be in the world from how you run your business or how you interact with your coworkers? What about from the challenging relationships you've had and the conflicts you've encountered? And what can this information tell you about the balance you need to strike between the strengths and weaknesses? What impulses do you need to control? And what controls do you need to loosen? Maybe your favorite TV shows reveal that you love to laugh and see the romantic side of life, that you prefer beautiful ideas and joyous endings. But maybe this also reveals that you have a bit of an escapism practice. Maybe you struggle more with stressful, negative, and real life situations because they burst your bubble and really bring you down. Maybe you're acting a bit of a negative Nelly in your real life because nothing is ever the way it is in the movies that you like, or maybe you've set yourself up for an impossible bar to reach. At work, maybe you're organized and pleasant with everyone. You treat everyone with a certain amount of respect no matter where they are on the business hierarchy. You always clean up your dishes in the workroom and you occasionally bring treats for your coworkers. How lovely. Now, check the alternative. Do you get annoyed when others don't behave as you think they should? Do you, in fact, have the intolerance for messiness of any kind and judge people based on this? Have you developed a superiority complex with people because they aren't as good as you are? How are your relationships because of it? Are they great on the surface as you play the nice guy but not very deep? Do you feel like you can't just be yourself with all your wants and still be appreciated by everyone? Does the idea of being yourself mortify you? Make a list. What are you good at and bad at? Now, across from all things on your list, try to write down what the strengths and the weaknesses might be. For example, I am messy, but that also means I don't need anything to be perfect in order to function well. Some people are paralyzed by mess. Spend a moment to see what you can notice about what you deem to be your strengths and your weaknesses. Can you see that they are traits of information that lead you to a clearer picture of yourself? Can you see how what you deem to be good and bad are in fact two sides of the same coin? And that when you own them in their entirety, it can help you create balance within yourself and release the notion of good and bad altogether. For it is easy to criticize and break down the spirit of others, but to know yourself takes maybe a lifetime. To take responsibility of one's actions, good and bad, is something else. After all knowledge simply means self-knowledge. Self-help. We are making these efforts to dive deeply into identifying, understanding, and working on our true selves, because without that knowledge and practice, we cannot grow closer to our full potential and attain our natural, essential nature. We thus cannot become more like water. How we perceive ourselves and how we direct our thoughts is key to being able to flow. My father would say it is not what you think, but how you think that's important. The what will become quickly influenced by the how. Is directed in a proper direction. Take this quote by way of example. It is one of my favorites from my father. We shall find the truth when we examine the problem. The problem is never apart from the answer. The problem is the answer. Think about it concretely. When you look at a simple algebra problem like 3 plus x equals 10, you cannot possibly solve for x without the other components. The answer is within the problem. It would be crazy for us to look at that math problem and start looking at the refrigerator for an answer. Yet, that is what we do all day long. In particular, we do it by blaming others for our problems. That's not to say that people don't stand in our way sometimes, but the solution is always in our own hands. Always. We just need to be more creative about how we look for the solution that eludes us. Always late for work? Set your alarm clock 10 minutes earlier. That's not the answer. Go to sleep earlier so you're not too tired in the morning. It's more serious than that. Take a look at whatever or not you may be depressed. Or, oh, we're getting warmer? What is the root of your depression? Do you need to go seek help? Follow the problem. Try on some solutions, but follow the problem. See what you notice. Let the problem lead you. My father would encourage us as we sit with our problems to be alert, to question, to find out, to listen, to understand, and to be open. This is the great checklist for ourselves. Was I paying attention? Did I ask all the questions? Did I find out all the answers? Was I listening? Do I understand what happened? Was I open to the whole experience? My father would caution us not to work for information, but to work for understanding. For it's not how much you learn, but how much you absorb in what you learn. Bruce Lee wrote down his thoughts and actively processed his learning all the time. He didn't journal in the typical sense of the word, meaning he didn't have numerous bound journals that he neatly kept, but he did track his progress, write down his ideas, goal set, dream, hypothesized out loud. He would craft letters and essays through numerous drafts. We'll discuss more of the ways in which my father used writing as a processing tool in Chapter 5, but from his own writings we can see what was important to him and what put him on the path to self-discovery, or as he called it, self-help. In one piece of writing from 1972, he noted that he had a deeply inquisitive nature and would ask himself these questions all the time as a youth. What comes after victory? Why do people value victory so much? What is glory? And what type of victory is glorious? My father recalled how, as a child, he was a troublemaker and was greatly disapproved of his elders. He said, I was extremely mischievous, aggressive, hot-tempered, and fierce. Not only my opponents of more or less my age stayed out of my way, but even the adults gave in to my temper. He goes on to say he doesn't know why he was so truculent, just that whenever he met someone he didn't like, his first thought was to challenge him. But challenging him with what? The occasional concrete thing that I could think of was my fists. My father wrote. He continued, I thought that victory meant beating down others, but I failed to realize that victory gained by way of force was not a real victory. He recounts that later when he becomes a student at the University of Washington. He was guided by a tutor to help choose his courses, The tutor, upon noting my father's inquisitive nature and his numerous questions, suggested he take some philosophy courses. The tutor told him, "Philosophy will tell you what man lives for." My father noted that many of his friends and family were surprised that he was studying philosophy, since all he had ever been fanatical about was martial arts. They assumed he would go into some sort of physical education once in college, but my father quickly saw the connection between philosophy and martial arts. Recall that he wrote, "Every action should have its why and wherefore. I wish to infuse the spirit of philosophy into martial arts. Therefore, I insisted upon studying philosophy." It was through the study of philosophy that he began to see the error of his former ways and to regret his previous assumptions about victory, but only because he could reflect honestly upon himself and his actions. Coming to the conclusion many years later, he realized, whether I like it or not, circumstances are thrust upon me, and being a fighter at heart, I fight it in the beginning, but soon realize what I need is not inner resistance and needless conflict, but rather by joining forces to readjust and make the best of it. Joining forces with the problems and questions led my father to the solutions he was seeking and led him to a deeper understanding of his beloved martial arts and himself. As you investigate and stick with the problem, I encourage you to utilize the tool of journaling or writing as a way of tracking your discoveries and organizing your thoughts. Don't just think your thoughts, write them down. Physically track what you love, what you're curious about, your experiments, your ideas, your dreams. If you just think them and don't truly represent them in a way that turns them into a concrete practice for you, then they may just float in on one wavelength and out on another, or exist in a vague dream or recollection with no real plan of action. Like when I first began running my company, I had an idea of what I was trying to accomplish, but I couldn't express it to anyone because I hadn't really taken the time to consider and work through what my vision, my mission, my values were in concise, accessible, expressible terms. My employees could take directives from me and even trust me, but they were in relative darkness about where the ship was headed because it was just existed as a general thought in my own brain. This robbed all of us some vital agency within our jobs. Sometimes the act of funneling thoughts into physical form on paper can be a key part of self actualizing and can give us the sense that our mental wanderings and discoveries are now being held accountable by us and will not be forgotten. The paper or computer can be a place to work through your processes and list the questions that are pulling at you right now. It can be a workspace, a safety net, playground, or personal release. It can be a key to self help. In his work, my father set out clear guideposts along the path of discovery, and he advocated highly for self help. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to live in the New Age section of the bookstore, though he did advocate for perspective reading of all kinds of books. For him, specialized reading was mental food. What he means by self help is that you are the only one who can help yourself. Even in asking for else's help, you are helping yourself. Self help, however you come by it, reading books, journaling, seeking a mentor, going to therapy, talking things out with trusted friends, meditating, is simply you sleuthing for a solution, looking for your discovery, learning that works or doesn't work understanding your strengths and weaknesses. It's a process of self-empowerment. As he said, I have come to discover through earnest personal experience and dedicated learning that ultimately the greatest help is self-help. There is no other help but self-help. Self-help comes in many forms, daily discoveries, honestly, as we wholeheartedly do our best, indomitable dedication and realization that there is no end or limit because life is an ever-going process. As we position ourselves to be curious, to look deeply at ourselves, we must be courageous in the face of our fears and ready to integrate our understanding into our experience. This state of constant, independent inquiry that leads to new discoveries will be the means by which we uncover our potential and thus find our flow. Let it stand as a point of excitement and wonder that is this learning, this uncovering, this process is limitless, and therefore so is our potential. To be certain, every day there can be a revelation or new discovery that I can obtain. I dare not say that I have reached any state of achievement, for I am still learning, for learning is boundless. End of chapter 3.